kind of random.
What does joining Hip Hop Now's Patreon mean? It means supporting the kind of hip-hop content that keeps you updated on the latest hip-hop news and moves. It means supporting the production of content like That Time in Hip Hop and Hip Hop Now Reviews. It means you care about the conversation and preservation of hip-hop music and culture. Hip Hop Now Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, merchandise, and more. Support the movement. Become a supporter of Hip Hop Now podcast today at patreon.com/Hip Hop Now.
Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, we're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. No, this is not Rock and Roll Now podcast. It's still hip hop. Let's do it.
Let's get right to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic album. Classic album.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast that was designed to keep you caught up on all things hip hop, music, and culture that happens throughout the week. Shout out and gratitude to the producers of this podcast that support every month. Every month they support this podcast, not because they want timed exclusives or other bonuses that may come with being a producer of this podcast, but because they would like to see it grow. So if you are a longtime listener of this podcast or a new listener that appreciates the content being presented, being produced for this podcast every week, including this week on Hip Hop Twitter, That Time in Hip Hop, bonus episodes, and the weekly Hip Hop Now podcast news show. Show your support at patreon.com/Hip Hop Now. And if that was too quick, you couldn't write it down, you couldn't type it in, just look at the description of this episode where the link is. Now, if you follow me on social media, that being Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, TikTok, all of it, you know that right now I am in the midst of reading the new book about the one and only JD, aka Jay Dilla, entitled Dilla Time. I just want to say to you that unlike a lot of my counterparts, even though I had a early copy, I like to take my time when I read, right? I'm a busy man. I'm a busy man, okay? But when I do get to read, I like to take my time, and sometimes, I might put in a nice good marathon of reading, and sometimes I can only knock a chapter out before I have to do something. But nevertheless, please know that the official Vegas Hip Hop Now podcast review of the book Dilla Time is on the way. So if you would like to know what I think, be patient. And go ahead and read. Or if you might want to know, right? Should I buy this joint? I will let you know that as well. But I've already begun to read it. Spoiler alert, I'm into it. But we'll see what happens from there. Now, let's get right into the business at hand. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know, like I know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a very prestigious honor for musicians and artists. Despite the name Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there are a number of artists from various genres of music that have been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, including pop, jazz, metal, and hip hop. And I know, we're the new kids on the block. We're the rich ones. We're the number one streaming genre for the last couple of years by a mile. Hip hop has, and we like stuff like this, so don't take offense, but has infested everything as it relates to hip hop culture. Some of it is an infestation in itself, the way they use it, but we're not going to talk like that. But nevertheless, you know, like I know, hip hop is extremely popular today and lucrative. And so, like my previous episode that you could check out about do the Grammys matter now to hip hop fans, it's a sign of the times. And I'm not going to pretend like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame hasn't inducted hip hop artists in the past. But we ain't going back, but so far, before they started to do so. So recently, the 2022 nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame were announced. And we only care about hip hop. Don't get me wrong. I love all kinds of music, but this is Hip Hop Now podcast, so we're going to talk about the hip hop nominees. And honestly, there's only two that matter. With the Rage Against the Machines, I like them. I know, but it's kind of rapping. You can't front. But nevertheless, those two are Eminem, who is eligible for the very first time, and A Tribe Called Quest, who is also eligible for the very first time. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, okay, if anybody's going to get into some form of Hall of Fame, those two should definitely go in there, right? I'm not saying they should go in there before someone who's not in there yet. But before we talk about the merits of Eminem and A Tribe Called Quest, well, let's talk about who's already in there. Who from hip hop has already been not nominated, but inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And we're going to go backwards. Most recent inductees to the oldest inductees from hip hop. All right. So you already know Jay-Z, LL Cool J, right? Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Notorious B.I.G., of course. Tupac, of course. NWA, y'all remember that, is in there. Public Enemy is in there. Public Enemy need that movie. Get that biopic happening. Beastie Boys are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yes, they are hip hop. Do your history. Run DMC, of course they are. You know what I'm saying? Of course Run DMC is in there. And lastly, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Now, I think it's safe to say when you hear who's inducted so far, who has been inducted out of those hip hop acts, there's a lot there, right? There's success on the sales side, right? There's huge popularity. I feel comfortably, and you should, calling all of those men, and it should be some women, because we noticed that there were no women there in the hip hop thing. But nevertheless, we notice also that they will all be considered legends in the game. Always in the conversation for best group of all time, or, GOAT. The GOAT's already in there, it's LL Cool J, but whatever. But, that's how it goes. So that's who's in there so far. Now, obviously, when you think about it, you say to yourself, okay, all of those acts have had some level of huge success. And I get it. This is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, inducts artists from all genres of music. So you can't let everybody from hip hop in. Like hip hop can't flood the list of nominees. But I know what you're saying. Where's Rakim? I know that's what you're saying. Hey, yo, where's Nas? And again, Rakim would be eligible, right? Because the rule to be nominated, and you know, I don't know if Rakim was ever nominated. That's the one thing I don't know. But one of the things is with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as far as the rules is, the rule is from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame standpoint that an artist's first commercial recording needs to be released 25 years earlier than the year of nomination. Now, I know what you're saying to yourself, wait a minute. How long ago did Eminem drop? Tribe makes the cut, but how long ago did Eminem drop? Right? And it makes sense when you're thinking about it like that. But nevertheless, first recording. So you don't know what Eminem's actual first recording was, right? 25 years ago? Maybe it has been 25 years ago, but I refuse to believe that, My Name Is, right? That was the first single, or Guilty Conscience, that those were the first major releases. He could have released another single at some point, right? He did have that Project Infinite. I don't know what label it was on, blah, blah, blah. But you get my point, right? It's a technicality. But A Tribe Called Quest definitely meets that, right? Considering when they've released their first single. So does Rakim and KRS-One. And definitely Nas, right? Nas came out before Jay-Z. But this is not the Hip Hop Hall of Fame. This is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which includes all genres. And I think what people feel, hip hop fans who, kind of like, man, who cares, right? We need our own. I think people want to be validated and also to celebrate. It's two sides, right? Some people want to be validated in talking about somebody as being great. And them being inducted into a Hall of Fame says so, right? It's gratifying as a fan. Some people believe these artists, these hip hop legends need to get their flowers in this kind of way while they're still here. Because what's going to happen, right? Now, I get the two, I see the pattern, right? The pattern is last year you had Jay and you had LL. Two totally different eras of rappers, with Jay-Z being a more recent, and I'm putting up air quotes, but a more recent guy in regards to, not in regards to, but in comparison to LL. LL is like, he was out in the mid 80s. Jay-Z debut didn't drop until 96. So maybe he's more like 10 years removed from LL's debut. But LL is a legend from another time for another generation, whereas there's a generation now that looks at Jay-Z as almost being current, even though he isn't. And I feel like that's what they're trying to do, right? They're not, look, politics is everywhere. They're not going to do a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, two of them for hip hop, that are so far back they don't resonate with several of the newer generations, right? Because you want the younger audience to be active, or young enough to be active with this thing, right? Watch it, tweet it, buy music, buy merch from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, everything. Share their videos of the ceremony. all of that stuff. So when you have Jay-Z and LL, well, now you're getting all of hip hop, right? When you get Tribe and you have Eminem, well, you also getting all of hip hop. But if you make it Rakim, which is a damn shame, you probably got to make Rakim and Nas going at the same time. Because Nas has been putting out some great music, so he's still relevant. But you have to do this stuff now, or certain people ain't getting in while they, breathing. Sorry to be so morbid, but because the longer the time goes, I mean, Drake is pretty active and pretty popular still. But that man came out over 10 years ago. Easily. I don't think people realize it. People don't realize Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, all these cats came out a while ago. Doesn't feel like it, but they have. If this were a different time in hip hop, like back in the days, I mean, you 10 years in the game, you old school. But no one would call Drake and Kendrick and them old school. And that just has a lot more to do with hip hop is getting older, right? And older MCs are sticking around longer, remaining relevant for longer. And hip hop is healthy as a result of that. But it's kind of cut off, right? It's really like only about those older artists who are still popular in some way. Jay-Z is, Eminem is, Nas get in, he is. So you can have that fresh side, but there's gonna become a point where you gotta start letting in more of the legends for their contributions, right? Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 made perfect sense, right? Perfect sense. Public Enemy makes sense. NWA makes sense. It's pioneers, right, in the game. But think about this. They let in those groups, but Dr. Dre, and especially Ice Cube, they have solo careers that require them to be inducted as soloists. You know what I mean? Like, you can't go but for so long without putting Ice Cube in as a soloist or Dr. Dre in as a soloist. The sum of their success wasn't just NWA. Not at all. And then we're going to get to the point it was like, all right, when are you putting Outkast in? Because Outkast is going in, no doubt about it. If there's any group in the history of hip hop that has incorporated so many different genres of music into what they create and still have the admiration of the hip hop community without being called sellouts or crossovers or whatever, Outkast should definitely go in. But like I know, with the Universal Hip Hop Museum being built, something official that we can feel proud of, that we can visit, at some point, somebody's going to have to put some serious money into that project to establish an official Hall of Fame for hip hop. And literally, you got to start big. You got to start with at least 5 to 10 acts. Not all in the 80s, right? Not all in the 90s. But you're going to have to put in a good 10 groups and artists, including the ladies, in order to establish something for us. Because with hip-hop being the biggest genre as far as streaming, and everyone who wants money and wants to make money knows that, they're going to keep doing what they're doing with all the bread they have so they control the narrative. That's going to do it for me. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and all that good stuff at Vegas World INC. And please know that this podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. All you have to do is subscribe. If you like the show, hit that subscribe button, review the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, leave a comment on or how you feel about it. And more importantly, for the growth of this podcast, share it with people you know enjoy this kind of content. I'm Vegas, and I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.